Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your co-host, Joanne.
And on today's show, June 5th, 2017, we speak with Angela Keaton, Executive Director at Antiwar.com, a project of the Randolph-Bourne Institute. Here is that interview. Okay, on our show today, we have Angela Keaton of the Randolph-Bourne Institute, which hosts Antiwar.com, a site I visit every day to see what the latest anti-war news is. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome, Angela. I'm so psyched you're here.
Hey, now I've seen what you both look like in real life. I've seen your Twitter accounts for years.
I am actually a beam of light coming across an ocean or a pond now that you've seen it in real life. That's my AVI.
The blue butterfly.
Anyway. So one of the reasons we want to have you on the show, besides our being fans of antiwar.com, is people opposing U.S. imperialism come in many different forms. For those who are listening might not know, who read Shadowproof or read Fire Dog Lake. And one of the forms they come in is also libertarianism, which opposes the empire for, I think, similar reasons, but not entirely the same reasons as people, for example, who might call themselves progressives or social democrats. So I was wondering if you could explain where you're coming from intellectually to get to the point where you see your political work or your activism as part of an anti-war website.
Well, I'm a second-generation anarchist, libertarian, so I'm a right anarchist. I don't really know what that means other than I guess I'm not a communist, but I'm an anarchist. And in libertarianism, and I'm describing a wide range of people, so I'm probably going to screw this up terribly, but I'm talking about everyone who maybe considers themselves maybe from a constitutionalist to a classical liberal all the way to a left libertarian or anarchist. And by that, the end of that range might be somebody like Karl Hess. The reasons for libertarians opposing the war, well, the economic one is the obvious one. I mean, if you believe in small government or no government, you can't really, war is the biggest thing the government does. You can't believe in a giant state for that. But I just want to back up for a second. I do really believe, though, that many of my libertarian brothers and sisters, as peculiar as they are, many of them do oppose war on the grounds that it kills people. And a lot of us are really kind of upset about that. I mean, the whole mass murder thing, I think, is one of the basics. And if we're going to go trying to change systems and bring a philosophy of peace and freedom, especially freedom, what kind of freedom can you have if bombs are going over your head or you live in a police state? So this is the issue that needs to be tackled first, not stealing my money to kill children. I think just should be a basic, but for some reason, this is really controversial and people really get upset about it. And if you believe that, you can start fist fights in public. It's crazy. But apparently this is one of the most controversial beliefs there is that like not killing children with tax money or just not killing children with mass large weapons that only a giant monolith state could have. That for some reason ticks people off. And I don't know why, but it does. It even ticks some people off in the libertarian movement and it's the crazy splits in the libertarians that no progressives care about at all. But I'll just mention most of the splits in the libertarian movement that are so rabid are actually about the war, specifically Iraq number 2. And it's caused the movement so much angst and all the splits at the top that have certain people roughly between like a more mainline libertarianism and a more of a coalition of different radical anarchists from the paleo libertarians all the way to left libertarians. There's a real division over how to pursue the end of the empire because there are libertarians who are comfortable with some beyond defense. There are some people who actually believe that they want to liberate other people. There's a lot of people who want to spread democracy. I don't want to spread anything that resembles STD as far as I'm concerned. But, I don't know. I'm not anti-democracy in the sense that, it's all contextual, but just in the sense that I'm just anti-state. And so I don't know why anyone wants to spread the U.S. empire. I don't know why anyone wants to spread a giant police state all over the place. But when people say they're spreading democracy, all they're doing is spreading the largest parts of the state. And when we talk about big multinational corporations, those are all part of the state because they're all state-created entities.
Right.
So it's one thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Now, we do have somewhat of an international audience where we interview a lot of people from overseas. And libertarian in the European context, or really most other, is a left-wing term. It's kind of an anarchism. What's interesting about the right-wing variety that confuses a lot of people, I think, it's tied with Ayn Rand or Nathaniel Brendan, who would come later, right? Which is sort of more moderate stance, pro-property rights, pro-capitalism. The difference for me is the pro-capitalist vein, the Ayn Rand vein, versus the European libertarians. So explain that a little bit to me, because that's definitely one of the things that I think distinguishes, for example, American libertarians from European libertarians. Because, I mean, if you know, Noam Chomsky's a libertarian socialist, right? I mean, you hear that term. So can you clarify that a little bit for the audience?
No, yes. Libertarians in the U.S., we're right-wing kooks. And Ayn Rand is part of that. I grew up in a household where Ayn Rand was very important. I was allowed to read her unfettered as a little girl. And I've had difficulties adjusting in the outside world because of that. It's a very strange world point of view, but it is really great in certain doses and certain contexts. Unfortunately, people take a very, very literal view and try to extract a bunch of things from her novels because they want to take her very literally. Like if Ayn Rand liked cigarette smoking, for example, we all must like cigarette smoking. That's a little too far.
My God, that's Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard, right? The kids smoke, and they say, "Well, L. Ron Hubbard smoked."
It's bad. I mean, it's bad, and she, everyone's time bound, and we all want to think we're like ahead of our time, or not. We're universalists. But when I was a little kid and really thinking this through, the things that she would say about Arab countries and Arabs generally, or about this idea of savages, or very much kind of her mind eventually melded with the typical U.S. white supremacy that I guess everyone gets indoctrinated with. Yeah, she wasn't a perfect person. She was she acted like a man in some cases. She traded out husbands, boyfriends, that sort of thing, and kind of ran a cult group. And she split with the great Murray Rothbard, who's another famous right-wing kook who's one of our founding people in the movement. We have a bunch of founding people: Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, Thomas Zass, someone who's no one's heard of now, but on the really important issues of things like getting rid of involuntary civil commitment and all kinds of civil liberties violations in psychiatry. And Ayn Rand, certainly. I mean, for individualist thinking, the whole idea of an individual is a really profound thing. And I think it's a wonderful, amazing thing. Obviously taken too literally or taken too crazily, it can be extreme, but it does allow, especially I'd say little girls anyway, you see certain kinds of characters. Granted, there's all kinds of rape stuff I'd have to explain, let's say if I were reading it to my daughter, which probably should have been explained to me better. But the whole, away from, when you take some of the best stuff away from that, it still is really, really wonderful to think of each human being as an individual. And that's kind of where the beginning of individual human rights or universal human rights, every person's a human being. And that sort of circles back to, I know people associate Ayn Rand with letting poor people die in the streets, but think about it. She was, every bombing is a political crime. Every arrest is a political arrest in some ways. So in some ways, it is kind of my kooky anarcho-objectivism that makes me feel really strongly about not killing people, especially with, soldiers and cops doing it. So it does. I know it seems very weird when some progressives and leftists, though I usually don't find that the problems are being a libertarian in the anti-war movement are with progressives or leftists. They're with liberals. Liberals don't seem to warm up to us very well. And granted, libertarians often make a terrible impression. And there's a lot of strange things they do. And there's a lot of strange habits and cultural tics, like bringing up the gold standard of the Federal Reserve at the most inappropriate times. But those of us, the peace camp is definitely a sincere, if unusual, block of it. And unfortunately, it does contain some people who are a little bit right-wingier than maybe the average libertarian. But even if their heart's not always in the right place, their brain is on the war. So it's good for people to be against war. And
right. I guess the nut of the question for those of us who don't come from that perspective, trying to understand it, is the coherence, because you don't spend money on this or don't expand the state to hurt other people because it could hurt me, right? So, the forces, so the intelligence forces and the other, I guess, predatory forces the U.S. has unleashed have often come back and hurt the American people. We are now essentially living in arguable police state. Surveillance is typical. None of these things have really been rolled back. So you can see it from that perspective. I think what is hard to square for people who are just trying. I mean, I think those of us in the activist community, we take any allies we can get, but I'll take everybody. But some of the people go, well, Ayn Rand, man is an end in of himself, and she's all this stuff. Why are they opposed to it? So I kind of, that what you're saying makes sense to me a little bit more, that you're saying that there's actually, that's a division within libertarians themselves. Some of them have a moralistic or an empathetic, wow, people are being killed, and others are just sort of strictly like, this is not in my interest.
Right. And I mean, both those things can be true at the same time. I mean, it isn't in my best interest to live in an empire or a police state, and I don't want to be implicated in mass murder, which I am every day by taxes. So I mean, it's part of my anti-tax stance too. It's not necessarily, want to see poor people dying in the streets. Though I live in Los Angeles and there is a welfare state, and I still see homeless people in the streets, quite a few. So I'm not sure how everything is working out. But there's different schools of libertarian thought on this. A lot of us use capitalism as a certain kind of shorthand in a certain audience for a certain context. Like we say radicals for capitalism, because we try to scare like actual right-wingers into kind of joining us along, explaining to them like, we're not communists, so you might want to hear ideas all the way before you dismiss us as being libertines or whatever the conservatives' excuse are for not really believing in small or no government. But the self-interest, the morality of killing people. I mean, Ayn Rand talks about man being a moral animal, or humans being a moral animal. I don't want to make that it's specifically gendered, but if human beings are a moral animal, you would know. You don't have to have explained to you that it's wrong to kill children overseas. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, it's crazy that we even have to reason through it, or that there's even a division, or that there's even too many questions on, well, why would those horrible libertarians be against it? My question is, why isn't every decent person against it? I don't think you have to be, left to know what's right. It should just be instinctive.
It's a human thing,
Yeah, it's just really basic, and I don't really even want to start the freedom and individuality question if we're still committing mass murder, which means we're so far away from the idea of a human being as an individual. It's like we're centuries away from the world I think I want to live in. I want to live in Ancapistan, but I was thinking about capitalism. Capitalism is not we use it as a shorthand. We're trying to bring conservatives in, but what we really mean are free markets, which is like what we have now. We kind of call it capitalism. This whole crony capitalism. We don't believe in corporate welfare either. We think that the whole business idea of corporations as function of the state and all their special privileges are garbage. So yeah, there's a lot of common ground there on the things that people might think are the most radical. But if you think if you're really a conservative though, why, a lot of these apparatuses, don't make any sense, and people should be able to barter, and money should be freed too. I mean, the whole concept of a Federal Reserve to me just seems like one more way to control people. People can come up with their own kinds of money or trade or things out in the world, but we're so far away from that. It's like trying to argue, where we're going to rearrange the furniture when the house is flooding. As long as we live in a giant empire, and I live in LA, where the police state's a real thing, people get killed here, and very much along, racial lines that are historical, and really horrible government oppression directed towards certain groups, that these are the things that should be addressed first. So that's why I picked this issue as my priority. Other libertarians might see other things differently, though I'm kind of considered an average libertarian.
Well, I mean, here's a question, just a philosophical question before we're going to move on to, I think, where activists align and where they don't is, I mean, if this could all be done, just to try to understand, if this could all be done, the 600 military bases and the killings and the wars, but could be done for a third of the price, would that peel off any libertarians, or is it just because you're talking about an annual appropriation at least of probably roughly $1 trillion on paper, $650 billion. There's no doubt that this is a huge tax burden, either direct or indirect. So there's some people who are morally outraged by what's going on, and then there's others who you seem to say are libertarian in the sense that, hey, you're taking taxation, that's theft, you're stealing from me to do this. But if people weren't getting robbed so much, would you think people would peel away, or do you think it's actually is the moral part? Well,
people are getting robbed so much for now and they don't even notice. So I'm not sure what exactly I don't totally understand what motivates people. My experience, I was going to say, I kind of see more between 700 and 1,000 bases, but I don't know. I maybe
You're probably right.
I'm probably being hysterical because I usually am on this issue, but in all my years of doing this from a right anarchist perspective, while it's really good to impress people with facts and figures about budget and military numbers, the only people who are interested in it are a small group of conservatives, a couple of progressives, a handful of libertarians from Cato Foreign Policy, and it's 60 people on Twitter who care about the facts and figures. I have never been successful convincing anyone they shouldn't stop war because it's so expensive. The way Ron Paul used to do it, because he just appealed to people's, moral common sense, and that's really what it's about. I mean, if I have to appeal to people based on, it's really going to be cheaper if we stop killing children, I don't know how much I really want to spend time with those people in the first place. I mean, we do it. I mean, we keep the facts and figures, and I roll them out. But I mean, what am I going to do? Roll them out? I go sometimes to speak in front of Birchers. It's kind of crazy, a long story, but occasionally you do that. I mean, those people are already against war for a bunch of reasons. It's only going to reinforce the certain kinds of people and certain kinds of progressives. And the kind of people that we want to appeal to, we really do want to appeal to their moral sensibilities. I mean, conservatives and a lot of right-wingers consider themselves people of faith. But when it comes to the war issue, suddenly they just become like bloodthirsty Satanists.
Yeah. And well, I mean, I think I don't understand your audience that well. Well, I mean, I'm part of your audience, so I guess I understand my part of it. But it works on some left people because it's an opportunity cost, because we love to spend money, unlike the libertarians. So it's like saying, hey, we could have school lunch programs. We could do, we could have universal health care. We could have all these programs, but instead it's all getting sunken into this black hole in the middle of DC called the Pentagon, never to be seen again or audited. So I understand. I agree with your folks. It probably doesn't appeal to anybody. That sounds right. For us, it believe it or not, and it is cynical. I agree with you. You're saying kind of, but they really get excited about infrastructure spending in ways that are probably unhealthy. And so when we say there's this money, it touches a button.
Also useful and meaningful to me as a relative number. What it says about our society, that we'll spend this much on war, and yet we will pinch pennies on, people who are really in need. I think it is a very meaningful thing. In that,
we're part of those 60 people on Twitter she's talking about.
Now, I actually think there are a lot more people who do appreciate the numbers from a relative perspective. And like you said, opportunity cost. But I could be wrong. That means I waste a lot of time talking about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're wasting a lot of our time.
I shouldn't be so flippant about that. I just came back last week from a Future of Libertarianism conference where we talked a little bit about this, but also just, trying to reevaluate the anti-war movement in the era of Trump, because a lot of us are trying to figure out what the hell's going on now exactly. I run into all kinds of right-wingers in my world. Like I meet all the kinds of right-wingers there exist. I've met them all. Every kind of kooky nationalist, different kinds of racists, different kinds from different kinds, all of them. But so occasionally I will run into people, though, on certain parts of the right, more the populist right, who will say things like, why don't we spend that money here on American jobs and American trade and American infrastructure? So there are certain people on the right who will, if I do make those facts and figures, they're kind of even more outraged. They're like, why are we doing anything in Afghanistan when we have crappy roads?
That was Trump's campaign. He said we're building. I love that moment when he destroyed Jeb Bush and said we got nothing. We went into Iraq, we spent $1 trillion, and we got nothing. It's a total waste. And Jeb's just sitting there, please clap. And it was such a great line, but I was like, wow, that's a good populist line, even though it's put in a right-wing context. He said we should be building schools here. Okay? He was doing his thing. And I thought that was great. I actually thought that was a real, I listened to that. And I mean, obviously he doesn't believe it, apparently, now that he's president, but I thought it was a good line. Did that appeal to libertarians at all?
Yeah, well, it's a whole other fiasco in the movement at the moment, libertarian movement, where we had a few people ride the Trump train from subtly nuanced. So what I mean by subtly nuanced is more like the counterpunch, shadowproof, Black Agenda Report consortium line of the reasons why we dislike Trump are different from the reasons why elites dislike Trump. And that's what I mean by a nuanced critique. There's a lot of right anarchists who are right on board with all of you on that. We think that's correct. But there's some for reasons that married to some kind of crazy populist fantasy that does not actually happen in real life and can't under an imperial presidency, especially since everyone alive now is born, post Nixon now. So we just this huge structure. Not everyone alive is born, but you know what I mean? It's just like we live in a different era of giant, huge government structures. It's not like any person going into that office is going to make it any better, but that we had a bunch of Trumpistas in the libertarian movement. Well, not very many, but there was enough of them in high prominent places that it just felt like it was undermining the larger part of our anti-war message, especially going overboard. I mean, I understand some of the paleo-libertarian and paleo-conservative arguments about, well, since we made such a mess abroad, we need to close the borders. But geez, is that the audience we really want to appeal to? Is that really our best line of discussion here about the war on terror or any of these other things? But I get the populist message. I can see why it was supposed to appeal to people. He just was lying.
I was going to say one of the issues that's interesting is for Trump with appeals to libertarians is he was not libertarian on economics, unlike, most of the other Republican candidates. But yeah, to see him, I mean, there's one minority case for Trump that I've kind of held to a little bit. I haven't gone, I won't name names. I saw some libertarians seem to get on board the Trump train. They may or may not write for Antiwar.com. But one of the things I kind of liked is that Trump is destroying the empire, just not on purpose, right? Like he's wrecking it, like the kind of endless, like with garments and, oh my God, the Paris Agreement, which doesn't even go into effect until 2020. And it's just, we've lost all our prestige. If the elites continue to gaslight themselves into believing that, it kind of becomes true, right?
That would be really great. That would be awesome. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you on that. And I think a lot of libertarians are with you on that. A lot of us don't take the presidency very seriously in the first place, and we want it to have less power and less prestige. This stuff that you all call neoliberalism, we're against that too, even though I have to explain it I have to carefully explain it to my people. Like I have to constantly translate progressive and leftist terms into libertarianism to make them understand that.
But isn't that Hayek? Isn't neoliberalism Hayek, market solutions?
That's kind of why Hayek is my least favorite and the one I didn't name.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's some wonderful things about Hayek. Oh my God, if libertarians do this, I'm going to get beaten up again, thrown outside. I'm a suppressive person for a month, and it goes on.
Suppressive person.
It's a mess, but it's neoliberalism. This is why I don't think you can really get to sensible libertarianism or classical liberalism. And this is a minority position in the movement. I'm considered a little bit of a jerk on this. As much as I appreciate, the wonderful things I've read by people in the Scottish Enlightenment, I just don't see we can get to an anti-state position or something that's like the state, the largest hierarchy, patriarchy, racial structure ever, the United States government. We can't get to dismantling that from neoliberalism or classical liberalism. So I'm part of those libertarians who will say we go along with the progressives and the leftists on the neoliberalism is just bigger empire, just a bigger mess waiting to happen, and it's going to wipe out. This is where right wingers get confused too. I mean, it doesn't occur to them that other people care about their cultures as much as their kooky, weird alt-right stuff too. And people don't like it when people like to be asked permission, I think, before you go in there and throw up bases or giant corporations or a bunch of other stuff. I mean, it's their land. People get to have a say in it. We believe in private property, and that's neoliberalism is just a giant violation of property rights. So I'm gonna say no on that. No on neoliberalism. Bad.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, I mean, we agree. Wow, we really agree on that. I guess you're saying it's a minority view of libertarians, though, because that's definitely always confused me. Which is, it seemed like this is, Hayek, is it in the Mont-Pelerin Society or whatever you pronounce it, is a direct line to 80s Thatcher and Reagan, and no, not fans. All right. Well,
no. And the great Murray Rothbard.
That's a good one.
He is one of the great leaders of our cult. Murray Rothbard would have. What were some of the names of some of the freaks you just mentioned? I'm sorry.
Oh, well, Hayek in the Mont-Pelerin Society, right? That was his. He was literally a nobleman, right? He was a descendant of the nobles, right? I think von Mises is too.
Ronald Reagan is not the great Murray Rothbard would have wrote a lot of no on Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was not a libertarian president. He was not good for libertarianism. He was made government much, much bigger. He was a disaster. Normal libertarians aren't fans of Ronald Reagan. The only ones you hear, though, are probably, I guess, because the problem is that libertarians that one mostly sees in public are the ones that are the least controversial, the most moderate, the most acceptable to elite values. And I'm not saying this negatively or positively, just the ones that tend to be more connected to organizations that the Koch brothers have spent more time with in the past few decades. There was a time when the Koch brothers took much more interesting and radical positions, but that's an era from way back. But those libertarians, the Friedmanites, those are the ones that people see. So that's what they associate with, or worse, it's the Gary Johnson stereotype of the Republican pothead who just, I mean, we really actually ran our own cliche for this last LP, which really, that was just a cartoon right there. We're not all Republican potheads. No, but yes, we ran our stereotypes. So, we do feel a lot, and we do make really bad impressions on leftists and progressives a lot. I admit that. I had to explain to people on the anarchist right not to yell at important anti-war activists by screaming at them about healthcare. That's like the last thing we should be screaming about, because I think even Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich may have discussed this. But I mean, if we could just end the empire, whatever, have whatever healthcare plan you want. I don't care. I'll figure out my own healthcare, or I'll figure out another side job where I'll go to my own doctor or whatever. But I would concede on the healthcare issue just to stop the empire at this point.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm all, because I just want to see the end of it in my lifetime. And if I'm going to keep arguing over some of this stuff, or some of the, like the permanent entitlements like Social Security, which I totally hate, but I want to get closer to less violence and less death. So I'm not fighting. I mean, I'm not going to die on hills for the 6 libertarians who do love state propping up big business. I mean, that's not really the issue I want to go first out on. And it's not the issue, I want to start conversations with people, because, I mean, yeah, yay, we got 0.02 lower percent taxes. I mean, libertarians get really excited about that, but I'm too old for that. That's fine when I was 15, but I'm excited about that now. And it's not quickly enough to make enough of a difference, or we're going to deregulate the state. Well, if we're going to start with deregulation, you'd have to start with the Department of Defense. It's like the biggest damn thing in the world. Right.
It's exactly. Or the police, or the federal investigations. I mean, that's another part where I do see the left and the libertarians coming together is, for example, opposition to the war on drugs, or at least the way the war on drugs is exercised, and the corresponding, something I know Brian over at Shatterproof focus on a lot, the prison industrial complex, recent stuff like Rikers and the private prison systems, which, I mean, you can make prisons would be a libertarian thing, but if you're a freedom lover, then probably not, because they have an incentive to imprison people. So it does seem like there's a connection between the anti-war position and the anti-drug war position that leftists and libertarians could get together on. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, we hate the drug war. We absolutely hate and loathe the drug war. And that's a big thing for us. And we hate the police state. Dismantling that is part of the empire. I mean, to me, it's all one thing, but it is kind of covered the same kind of
Colombia. Yeah.
You blend the empire and the police state together a bit.
Yes,
I can see that. Yeah, because it always comes home. What we do in our wars, it ends up coming back.
Or the powers expanded to the DEA that are now being used by the Homeland Security. I mean, we had a guy on the show, a journalist, Ken Lipp, who talked about how phone hacking and database mining was occurring in the 90s and in the 80s. And then eventually it turned to a program called what was it? Hemisphere, I believe it was called, where there's AT&T is selling people's private, basically all your metadata to the police. And that's not a violation because it's a private company selling it to the police. They're getting paid. But all that tech was developed to fight the drug war. And now you just switch it over to the terrorism war. So it's all one interweb system. So I wanted to ask then, what, as going forward, rather than touch at least on some of the ideological, I feel like we could do that for hours upon hours, but what kind of agenda, or what do you think libertarians want to do? When I think of it, and just from general perspective, I think of Ron Paul and Ron Paul's campaigns, and initially Rand Paul's campaign before he signed that Iran letter and just, kaboom, just blew himself up in real time, which I think he got trolled by the neocons into signing that thing, thinking he could actually have a shot at the presidency. Is that the correct lens to think about your movement going forward, Ron Paul?
Well, the people who are now 30 years old in the movement, who were all these young Ron Paul kids 10 years ago when the Ron Paul idea really got started. And if you told me 9 years ago that Ron Paul was going to be a hit among the kids, I would have said you were, out of your mind. This never would have occurred to me that he would have made a comeback. That kind of libertarianism, a more populist, more open, less techno, not as, wrapped up in white papers and theory. That kind of libertarianism is what's influenced the young people. A lot of them have started from there. And a lot of them start from there and they go in different directions, like with anarchism generally. And a lot of, we joke about how that kind of, you start with Ron Paul and then you read through things and you often at anarchism. So for a lot of people, abolishing the CIA, it was always been traditional libertarian party, not, the thing that we would just say is like, yes, we want to abolish the CIA. That's just a given. A lot of the apparatuses that the left does not like, we are out front being against them. And, the draft, conscription, all these things we don't want those out. So there's a lot of common ground, even if we sound cranky and right wing and, we don't want to pay for anyone's, health care or post office or anything. There's a huge part across. There's a huge thing that crosses over. And to quote, a colleague of mine, it's easier we always joke about it. It's like it's easier to talk to a leftist about economics than to speak to a racist about being an idiot. So it's just so much easier to recruit. I mean, it's just easier for me to kind of recruit from, even though I'm kind of right-wingy, it's just easier for me to talk to people on the left about it. And then I just start with, different things. But then I translate it back for libertarians. Like once they understand that occupation means stealing land, they don't think it's a big leftist term. They think, oh, okay, they get it. They don't know. They don't know what that means. They just know it means something commie. Commie people say it. That's what their brain thinks. So I have to explain to them that we have to translate a lot of early American history that way so that they also understand it correctly.
So, okay, so we've got this president, Trump. The left is opposing him on a number of fronts. The right seems to be taking, I don't even know. I guess Republican stalwarts are just party people, just like we have people, the Democrats who just, they don't really care as long as it has a D or an R next to it. So I guess they're already spoken for. But what does a libertarian movement do when you have a Republican president, a Republican Congress, right? And Republicans essentially seemingly the more right-wing, a party that would in theory be closer to your ideals. Do you do primary challenges? Do you do protest movements? What's your what are you guys thinking about?
There's a million different strategies coming out of the U.S. libertarian movement. We have a huge, grassroots anarchist movement, and there's different places where people have congregated so they can act out, local freedom and peace legislation, like in New Hampshire. But a lot of us aren't sure where we're going. We have, a lot of us are talking about this. It's particularly difficult with the libertarian anti-war movement because some of the people that I generally expect to lead on the anti-war issue have gotten a little too wrapped up in a little bit too sold on what was going to happen with Donald Trump. He's already backtracked on pretty much everything that did matter, though I love the Lockheed thing. We don't know what we're doing. I don't know what the anti-war movement's going to do. I don't know what we're going to do with, if like a bunch of Richard Spencers come and flood our events. I'm not really afraid of that, but I just like, oh my God, that would be like the worst case scenario if these freaks start showing up at anti-war rallies. Because we have so few of them, and they're usually run by Answer, and it takes all my effort to get like 10 libertarians to go, and there'll always be some libertarian will come at me screaming, "You want me to march with Code Pink and Answer?" And I'm going to say, yes, you're going to suck it up and be a grown person about it.
Yeah, I feel the same way sometimes. So, and I'm not a libertarian, so
they can get annoying. But that's an interesting point, because I think I remember seeing on Twitter that there was when Trump bombed Syria. Or fired those for a long time. So it was Obama. When he fired on the Syrian government, which was an international war crime, not that anybody cares, but that there was an alt-right rally that, of course, the left responded to not as, even though many of the people in Antifa, which is a very, hardcore organization, are actually opposed to imperialism. They hate the alt-right so much that they ended up having scuffles. And it gets even more complicated than that. So I guess, is the alt-right a problem for you guys? What's the connection between those two, the libertarians and the alt-right? I don't get what's the crossover? Because Richard Spencer says he was a Ron Paul guy.
Oh yeah, no, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we had this weird intersection. I mean, I've always grown up around different parts of that. Usually I've been able to, keep a nice firm wall or learn how to kind of handle myself so things don't break into fisticuffs all the time. But there's a very small stream of that. There always has been like a paleo-libertarian, paleo-conservative, but it's more birchery and kind of old grumpy people. It's not so much like, kids wearing armbands and doing weird salutes and having all these weird characters and shields. And I don't know. I don't really understand Northern European culture. I don't know. It's like, it just seems like they want to like go Renaissance festival and make it violent. I don't think that's desirable. I don't want it around, but I don't know what to do about them leaking in. The best bet is a lot of them think that the libertarians are too libertine and they're too diverse now. So they're leaving it, and that might be for the best. I don't know.
Didn't they crash your event, though? Didn't they crash your event? I'm trying to think of instances where I know that there's been some conflict between the alt-right and libertarians. Didn't they crash an event you had, and then one of the guys told him off? I can't remember.
Oh, that's right. They did crash International Students for Liberty. Yes, Richard Spencer did crash International Students for Liberty by showing up at now, I was not a direct eyewitness, but apparently showing up at the hotel bar. I was upstairs at a conference when this happened, so I just saw it through the texting. But yes, Jeffrey Tucker, it's a whole other story. A professor named Jeffrey Tucker drunkenly yelled at Richard Spencer and told him, "Fascists, go away," in a very right-wingy sort of
right. But that makes sense, though, that they wouldn't be. This is an interesting question going forward, and it's actually both a philosophical and tactical issue, which is what is the actual intersection there? Because if you are a fascist, there's a big piece in the Atlantic about a person who went to school with Richard Spencer, and just saying that Richard Spencer likes Nietzsche and Carl Schmitt, who was the sort of legal jurist for Hitler. I mean, that's not a smear. That's not Godwin's law. That's like an actual description. He was one of the legal theorists of the Third Reich and, hailed Trump and all that. Why is that connected? That would seem antithetical to libertarianism if you're an anti-state, small government, because fascism is the connection economic? Is it cultural? Is it racial, maybe because of the demographics? I don't know.
There's a lot of different things in there, and it's unfortunate. Unfortunately, some of it just tying back to things like people from the libertarian camps I come from. These are kind of embarrassing and shameful, but coming up with newsletters to appeal to the worst elements of the populist right to make money. That sort of strain came in part because it was invited through that door, and then there's another strain of the imperialist atheists. We brought in way too many white middle-class Republican men who like to smoke pot or engineering majors all through the 90s. That's only people libertarians appeal to. And that, you wouldn't, there's supposed to be moderate libertarians, and that's usually kind of where they float in the moderate part of the movement. But because of the atheism going overboard, it kind of flips and they become obsessive anti-Muslim nuts. And that's another door that we get racialists through, because some of our paleo-libertarian standards aren't very high. We do get some traditional culture people who take it a little too far, and that all these crazy right-wing racialist distinctions that I can, make a chart of how these people kind of come different places they come in. I try hard to just, I'm making hand movements because the radio people can't see this, but it becomes a full-time, if you're in the libertarian movement, it's just a full-time job just to make sure the Libertarian Party doesn't get taken over by right-wing forces every 2 years. It's just constant. Being a professional libertarian means just constantly fighting off challenges, from right-wing power to come in and basically become parasites or to use or suck out. I mean, it's constant takeover. Bob Barr was our presidential candidate in 2008. And even though I can fist bump Bob Barr. I was a terrible candidate, and that whole situation was horrible and was a right-wing takeover. The same thing, we had Bill Weld as our vice presidential candidate. It just tells the world how horrible we really are. I mean, that's kind of embarrassing. I mean, nothing against the Libertarian Party. Those are my people, donors and readers and all that. But Bill Weld, that's the worst possible message we could have been sending the world as our VP candidate. So we know we've got a lot of problems, and that I'm well aware of the problems that libertarians have that are hard to explain, or like hard to, I'm not going to really rationalize them to progressives or leftists, because some of those critiques are true. I mean, there's the whole Coke. Like, I love taking Coke money. If I could get Coke money, I would rub my whole body in it all the time. I'm one of the people who doesn't get Coke money, and I feel badly because I'm left out of the Coke gravy train, as I really like some. But there's like
we should say for the audience that is KOCH, not anything to do with cocaine. That is Coke Industries money. Before you lose your.
But but since we're for decriminalization, I'll take cocaine money too. I can't really use picky since George Soros doesn't fund us either.
Damn it! I know it's like Soros money.
But like, some of the critiques that leftists make are right. Sometimes the Coke Industries, not let's say the Coke to push the ideological branch so much, but sometimes Coke Industries does things that are really not in keeping with libertarian principles at all, that are difficult to explain, or the other problems, or people. Some of it is too because liberals will come in, and to me, liberals are the worst. Well, no, they're not the worst.
They are the worst. No, they're the worst.
Okay, they're pretty bad. But they'll come in. They'll assume, for example, that what is that like that horrible thing, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah, TPP.
It's crap. It's like total garbage. And anyone who's a libertarian would just instinctively go garbage, call garbage on it. And it's long and it's got a bunch of words and stuff. It's too complicated. So I already know it's bad. And, it's like that neoliberal stuff we were talking about earlier. We're usually against, things like that. But because liberals like to interpret us in the worst possible light, or they'll just take the John Stossel show, and God bless John Stossel, he's wonderful in his own special way, but that's just a very tiny little itty bitty segment of libertarianism that really is not. That's like saying that Matthew Iglesias is what the progressives are.
Oh,
I'm sorry, that's awful. I'm sorry. I don't mean to insult your audience. I'm sorry.
He's a liberal anyway.
I consider him a liberal. I consider him a technocratic liberal douche. I don't consider him a progressive.
Sure.
Sorry.
But anyway, I know what you're saying. There's people who don't understand the left who look at Vox and go, "Oh, that's what left-wing people must think," and you're like, "No." But yeah, so I get what you're saying. So you're saying there is this coherent libertarian movement, but you have to fend off these far-right infiltration efforts. Although I think there were people who peeled off from the left that came in. I think Rand Paul, for example, because he ran on an Antiwar that had an established, meaning he had a reputation for actually sticking to it. And this was in the immediate aftermath of the Iraq War, which was such an unbelievable disaster that people sort of said, well, geez, at least this guy's for real. I don't agree with him, but at least he's for real. But then you wonder if maybe some people did start to agree with at least some of his positions. They didn't agree with the gold standard, but they probably agreed with, less involvement in other countries.
Wasn't it a matter of priority too? It's like when things get really bad, you're like, all right, well, I can tolerate some of their positions that I really can't stand. Plus, you have candidates that they totally don't represent the best interests of any of the largest segment of the population. And so among the choices, you're like, well, he sounds like the most rational. I think there's a lot of that going on. It's not deeply ideological. It's just, reaching out desperate for someone who makes sense and seems to care about the average person.
Yeah. Do you all remember that it was Ron Paul and Ralph Nader and Chuck Baldwin and Cynthia McKinney had signed on to something back in 2008. Bob Barr was supposed to sign on to it too, but he conveniently missed it. But basically, it's just like agreeing on a few things. Audit the Fed, debt forgiveness, restore privacy, and the empire. It was really simple platform, and that I thought. Those kind of coalition buildings, I think, are more realistic. If if all the people that, were core like Johnson supporters and all the people who were automatically going to vote for Jill Steiner, whoever was on the Green ticket, worked together to dismantle some of these things, we'd actually, make a little bit of a dent. The last presidential candidate, I don't vote as I'm an anarchist, but if I did vote, the last presidential candidate I really liked was Cynthia McKinney. I thought like she was I could live in Cynthia McKinney's world. Yeah, she's kind of pinko and everything, but I could learn to live if Cynthia McKinney was president. I'd grumble less.
Well, I mean, didn't Sanders? It's funny. Sanders did, if I'm remembering the history, and I think I actually am correctly. Sanders was a Senate sponsor of the Audit the Fed bill. This was in the immediate aftermath of the bailout, right? And so there was kind of a left-right coalition between Ron Paul and his cohort in the House and Sanders and some progressive Democrats in the Senate, because not just audit the Fed because of the gold standard, but audit the Fed because they had done this secret bailout of Wall Street that we only even knew about because Bloomberg News had sued them and a judge had forced them to disclose, and it turned out it was like hundreds of billions of dollars off the books. So maybe maybe that's a better way to do it than try to. Of course, if you're spending your whole day fighting off the alt-right, I imagine you're going to have I don't know how many resources you'll have. Is that maybe, I don't know, but maybe that isn't model though. You're right.
More like coalitions and parliamentary governments kind of thing. They must know how to do it.
There's definitely a way of it. Just that people have to get rid of a lot of ideological skirmishes over like the list of priorities. I mean, there's some things that just aren't. Libertarians don't always have their priorities in order, and this often keeps us from actually getting our agenda, our needs, what we want. I mean, it would take a whole lot of different people to, let's say, get marijuana as decriminalized as it is, and we're still a long way from even that really truly being something that people can do outside without getting arrested. But yeah, libertarians are their worst enemies on these sorts of things, because we could have stopped corporate. I think we all could have stopped corporate welfare a long time ago. Maybe that's too hopeful. No, I'm just being hopeful because I haven't eaten in a while, so I'm being lightheaded.
Enjoy it, embrace it.
Yeah, and it's the lack of priorities. I mean, Ron Paul was a different kind of conservative because it's just a different kind of libertarian, because he didn't try to push a lot of theory or white papers, and it's kind of off-putting when, I mean, like I try to explain this to libertarians all the time, like you don't shove a copy of a Cato white paper or a copy of Reason Magazine in a leftist's face and expect them to,
read it.
Yeah, it's boring. It's like, I mean, that's not interesting. That's not why people become, libertarians. I mean, it's better to start with, if someone really is on the actual left, I would say with like, yes, a lot of us believe in abolishing prisons.
Right. And it's, well, I mean, do you think, and this just, I guess look back in time, but I wonder about this, that if Rand Paul had not self-destructed, would there have been more of a linear, coherent path for the libertarian movement if he had simply picked up the torch from Ron Paul and as a senator, which is a more considerable position, ran essentially a Ron Paul campaign with a little bit more 21st century polish, that the libertarian movement would actually be more coherent today? Or do you think what's the current state was inevitable? Because
what you suggested makes sense. That was never actually going to happen. It would just made too much sense. So no, it's not. We're not able to execute anything that well yet. Maybe when they let Scott Horton and me and a few other people in our generation actually take power, which we should have by now, but libertarians are very long to live. So I'll be about 80 before I'm allowed to have the reins of anything.
Wow. The Democrats, same thing with the Democrats. They won't go.
Yeah, using their own seeds, right? Or actually, that's a good question I want to ask you about. I was going to say whatever that multi-pack Alex Jones stuff. Alex Jones claims he's with you guys. Is he a libertarian? What is he? God. Oh, these are such great questions. This is the stuff that I definitely want progressives to hear about. Alex Jones was the reason Scott Horton and I met, and there probably wouldn't have been anti-war radio if that meeting hadn't occurred. Alex Jones is an awful, hilarious character from the turn of the century when we all lived in Austin, and it's stunning. Oh my God. Anything I sound is going to sound like sour grapes, because he came up with the best scams, the scams that I should have sold out to like
all of his scams, like the water filters, everything. And he can afford to give his ex-wife $42,000 a month in child support payments, which she certainly deserves. She probably deserves twice that from being married to him. But anything I say is going to sound like sour grapes because anti-war radio didn't do as well, and we're not. Well, Scott Horton's show, it's a limited. It's a very refined, very elite audience of KPFK listeners and intellectuals and some Birchers and some hardcore leftists. But Alex Jones is heard everywhere. So anything I say is going to be jerky. But no, he's that's wow. No, I'm sure, and this is true, that Alex Jones has been a gateway to some good people coming in, because then once they leave the Alex Jones behind, they get rid of all that and they get past that, and they usually can be pretty solid. But some people, once they go through that door the other direction, wow, there's no coming back, and it's flat Earth society. And
I've broken the conditioning.
There's a lot of flat earthing in my circles, which is okay. I mean, I love flat Earth. It's not my thing.
I'm just saying, once again, you would know better than us. So, but I'm saying that's what he classified himself as. Roger Stone says he's a libertarian. All these guys say they're libertarians. So when we out here in the conditioning, I've broken the conditioning. When you have people out here who are in the conditioning, in the matrix, on this astral plane before it's been infiltrated by reptilians, when we hear libertarian, we're thinking, oh, Alex Jones Stone. I mean, I don't know what to, is it just he's not a libertarian because he's conspiracy oriented, or
he's just a total asshole. I mean, sorry, that was not the wrong thing to say. That was like the wrong thing to say. He once said I was very articulate, so I shouldn't be so mean. You can unpack that very articulate thing any way you want, but that was Alex's comment about 20 years, 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. But Roger Stone and Alex Jones, I mean, if you use the term so broadly to mean like some sense of classical liberalism versus feudalism, I guess, yeah, sure. I guess they're libertarians, but no more than like Nick Kristof or Matthew Iglesias would be leftists. I mean, they're just, no, they're not libertarians. And it's not because even
it's a convenient label for them. It's just a convenient label.
Well, it used to be okay. Here, help us with this. What's the difference between a paleoconservative and
a libertarian? Oh, okay. The paleo, there's a whole lot of things. Some of them, some of it's more of a cultural construct, because a lot of let's say paleo libertarians do have a distrust of centralized governments, and they do have trust of people, of governments generally. So even though they're culturally conservative, they generally just want to be left alone and leave other people alone, even though they're going to sneer at your multicultural day or whatever. They're not going to get in the way of it. They're not going to try to hassle you over it. They just want to rear their children their own way. And with the paleocons, it gets a little more like border closings, very much a little more sense of nationalism, not necessarily always white nationalism, just sort of an generic North American nationalism that is not really, is kind of antithetical to libertarians, because it's, of course, obviously not anti-state, because you have to have a nation to have a state. But a lot of libertarians haven't gotten that memo yet. But yeah, those are things like paleo usually refers to people who come from more of a traditional background. They're more maybe attached to, I guess, some of the values that we think of as the West in the generic sense. They really kind of in love with that fantasy of America, that everything was kind of great. Their libertarian may come more from a founding father's point of view, unless they're hyper traditional, then they might see kind of through that. But
okay, so they're more alt-right than they are libertarian, the paleocons.
Right, but they're not like the alt-right division. I mean, I think I had such a great moment the other night, but I had to get to a certain place in my head to find it. But there's a place where there's obviously the breakdown between libertarians and the alt-right is one, the use of force, the use of violence. I know the alt-right means a whole bunch of different people, but let's just say, speaking about, let's say, I think the kind of world Richard Spencer wants requires a very active state to police people.
Yeah, you got to police people racially in his state.
Right. Yeah, that's
it's going to take a long time.
Right, but I mean, I would even argue that our current state probably. I mean, I would say that our current police state does already police people by race. Like
he wants to cleanse them, though. I mean, he's sort of, it's one thing to, discriminate and sort of, prop up hierarchies and traditional discrimination. It's another thing to say, we got to, Duarte in the Philippines clean this neighborhood out of undesirables, quote. You know what I mean? That's a very active government, that even more active than the current one we have, right?
That's a very active government, and that's not a libertarian position, but God, they're part of it's the free speech thing. Back in the 90s, in my regrettable teenage years, I went way overboard with the anti-PC things, not totally understanding there's a difference between advocating First Amendment rights and free speech issues versus being so hysterically anti-PC that you're just going around being offensive and being obnoxious all the time. And unfortunately, libertarians in the 90s, when we were just appealing to that special crowd of white male libertarian, computer engineer, atheist, marijuana users, I mean, the anti-PC thing was very high then, and the anti-PC thing has made a raging comeback again. And it's not really so much of a free speech issue. It's just that we want to be offensive, and that's why sometimes we end up embracing cartoon people like Milo Yiannopoulos, and also too, libertarians are very fall the scams and they want a savior all the time, just like normal. I mean, libertarians follow the same moral problems everyone else does, and that's why briefly the embrace of Milo Yiannopoulos, that people wanted to be seen with him. I don't get it. We already have Justin Raimondo, and Justin Raimondo is a much higher quality of whatever. Milo Yiannopoulos is like a third-rate common copy of that, but we don't need Milo Yiannopoulos. But it's just there's like that kind of like just offensive to be offensive and being contrarian. We draw a lot of those personality types into the political movement, and because we've always been so small, we haven't always kept the best standards. So yes, we get those people, but the right-wing takeovers aren't just all right takeovers. I mean, it's also like corporate right takeovers, and that's the problem I think with some of the Koch. And my views on this are very nuanced and mixed. I love some aspects of the Koch, the Puss and the Koch brothers, and not some of the others. And it's not so clear, but like leaving that door open for neoliberalism, which to me is just another form of right-wing crankery. It's just more subtle and tasteful right-wingy stuff. It's like cosmopolitan right-wingy, the way like people who listen to NPR unironically think of themselves.
Why do the conservatives or the right, why do they co-opt libertarians? Is it to bring them over to the conservative side, or is it more like on the left where you had Hillary Clinton saying, I am a progressive, and the only reason she did that was to hide, her true nature, because, the establishment parties have become so incredibly unpopular. Brand herself, not just Hillary, I shouldn't pick on her alone, but, is that the same? Oh, and then also, we constantly have the establishment left trying to co-opt the progressives, like pretend they're really progressive and all that until like 3 months before the election, and then they jump out in front of the parade and march everybody down to the dead end street, and it always ends up the same thing. All these super progressive heroes magically transform like 6 weeks before the election, and they're like, all right, you guys, you all better vote for that Democrat, because if you don't, then the whole world's going to end and blah, blah, blah. And, it happens every single time. It's for votes, but they also use it for, camouflage. Let's put it that way.
All the above happens to us all the time. And of course, Gary Johnson can't hide his true nature because he takes a lot of edibles, which became evident really pretty quickly.
What is Aleppo?
Yeah. Oh my God! There's so much hilarious backstory there too, and hopefully someday someone will come on the show to tell you. But just say that
tons of people don't know what Aleppo is, by the way. Anyway,
but they're not running for president.
True.
I wish I could live in a world where Gary Johnson can walk around Stone and not care where Aleppo is, but unfortunately we don't because of our stupid foreign policy.
Right. Oh, touche. Yeah, that's right. In an ideal libertarian world, the president would just kind of be there. He'd just be hanging out. He wouldn't really do much. He wouldn't be bombing people.
No. It'd be a lot less. It'll be it'll be a much easier job. I mean, all the same things that like I see like liberal Twitter is still like trying to, Hillary Clinton, oh my God, the world would have been better. And all the reasons why I think you all would have said that Hillary Clinton is horrible. We all would have said Hillary Clinton was horrible. We all agree. I think there is lots of agreement on that there. It's and it's very, very hard. I mean, only in the context of certain kinds of moderate libertarians could you find a person who's willing to vote for Hillary Clinton. I mean, very few Hillary Clinton, more for Trump if there was any, who were actually going to go that direction. We understand all the same problems. I mean, Bill Weld was on our ticket for who the hell knows why. My monkey brain is too simple to understand why the heck Bill Weld was on our ticket, but I'm sure it was not for any good reason. And Gary Johnson ended up peeling away votes from Trump.
Right. That was a question.
Thought they were, they were going to peel away. I think they thought they were going to peel away more from Hillary Clinton, but they didn't.
He had a lot of support in the active military.
Really?
I remember there was a poll that was done by, military.com. And then there was another guy who, just independently runs, I think, a Facebook group. And they were getting big numbers. Yeah, they were getting some big numbers.
For Gary Johnson, interesting. Well, I mean, but the thing with the Libertarian Party is it has it says it's called the Party of Principle, right? It has some seemingly.
It was for
Bill Weld would be in opposition, right? The Ron Paul people would in the continuation, but Bill Weld does kind of contradict a lot of that. But that would be a place where you would say, look, my only issue is anti-war. Trump did not really run an anti-war campaign. He ran I hate them so much I don't even want to touch them campaign. Right? I don't want to help them. I hate them so much. I'm going to bomb the oil and then I'm going to leave. And so that's not really an isolationism. And even the isolationistic, or, I would say, common sense foreign policy, he broke all those anyway. He doubled down. He's apparently set to double down on Afghanistan because we just cannot stop sending money there. There's some law that we have to throw money out of an airplane into Afghanistan every 10 days or the world will end. So apparently we're going to keep doing this again, despite he expanded the war in Syria. He bombed Assad, which is a clear international war crime. He now recently went and kissed the Saudis' ass after he called them slave merchants and, haters of killers of gays. Before Flynn got ousted, and I thought Flynn was going to be a somewhat moderating voice because he wasn't a neocon. He actually was gearing up for a war with Iran. So these people, I mean, I don't know. It seems like we got the worst of everything. So yeah. I don't think the libertarians were going to go with Trump, and I don't think people who were anti-war could vote for Hillary or Trump. So I think Gary Johnson was kind of, if that was your single issue, can he bomb the country if he doesn't know where it is?
It makes it harder, and I'm trying to afford that. I want it to be harder for presidents to do the worst things that they do.
Well, he cured his cataracts, so I guess he could find it. But
The worst. No, Bill Weld was like a slap. Pretty much Bill Weld was across the board, irritating everyone from the most conservative paleo libertarians all the way to the left libertarians. Bill Weld just, because he really does, literally, he brags about how he does this morbid joke about how his ancestors weren't the very first over. They sent their servants first. And he thinks that's just hilarious.
Oh my God.
He's an actual descendant of genocidal jerks. And everything, we try so hard. Libertarianism isn't just this thing for white upper middle class men from Anglo-Germanic backgrounds
who are upset they can't tell racist jokes anymore.
Right, exactly. And then of course we put Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, which is like saying everybody that they were WASP only country club, except for your uncle who's stoned all the time. He's okay. We can sort of country club that, but that's what it's like. That is not anything what libertarianism looks like. I mean, very few libertarians are even upper middle class, and you see that, and it's completely unrepresentative of like the mass of grassroots activists. But people think that they want the most respectability, and from a total pragmatic position, that's probably the ticket that was going to raise the most money. Libertarians need money. We can't do any of our things without money, and we have to compete against. Well, we're competing against the Democratic corporate money too, not just the conservative corporate money.
Oh yeah.
It's not like we just have a few freaks. We don't really have it's not like there's it's not like the corporate world is really that excited about the libertarians. Corporations really aren't that crazy about it either. Most of the right wingers don't particularly love us. But we have structures.
They're fickle, right? Peter Thiel, he was with you for 1 minute, and then Peter Thiel went to Trump.
Oh yeah, God, yeah. I have a hard time explaining Peter Thiel. Like, those are just one of those weird stories, like that time when we have a billionaire that's interested, and they'll float through and something will happen, then it goes away.
Well, you would think in Silicon Valley you would find more, right? Because like you're talking about in the 90s, the engineers, tech, that's where you found maybe your highest percentage of, or highest likelihood, let's say, of libertarian. So some of them have to be, right? What
self-sufficiency, high educated, independent people. I mean, that would make sense to me that they'd be more libertarian leaning because they're not dependent on social programs, because they're professionals and are making decent money. But what I think people who are listening to this should understand, what's kind of strange about the whole thing, is that there's actually a lot of libertarians. It is the third largest party. Which is mind-blowing on some level, given what we're talking about, the ins and outs and the dysfunction. But there's actually a constituency for libertarians that may, I don't know the pure numbers of it, it may rival at least the social democratic faction, although I think that's grown a lot since Bernie Sanders came on the scene. But what would you say? I mean, what would you estimate the amount of? There has to be a lot because there's so many organizers.
How many self-identify?
Yeah, but it has to be a significant percentage, I would think.
The moderate libertarians love doing this. They love creating a category that's broad, and they love putting out some survey that says 14% of Americans are libertarians. When you actually look at the way, in the abstract, certainly, like if I came to you and said, wouldn't you like to pay fewer taxes and people should mind their own business? And you say, yeah, that sounds great. It's like when they used to do
world's smallest political quiz, and everyone was a libertarian.
Everyone's a libertarian.
100%.
Be a little selective.
Right. And actually applying theories, and this is part of my personal problem with Gary Johnson. He's a delightful man, but he's just not instinctively libertarian. He's not instinctively libertarian. It's someone who had to be very rationally walked through the principles of libertarianism. I'm more comfortable with people who sort of instinctively, from an emotional part, understand to not enact violence on other and leave other people alone, and not believe in collective identities for individuals. So that,
like Ron Paul did that. He looked like the guy who was unmasked at the end of every Scooby-Doo episode, but he did the old crank, like, why do we have to do this? What do I care if you want to do drugs? And that visceral, I think is what you're saying, visceral element connected because it was sincere.
Yeah. I mean, he was taking a lot of the varnish off our actual message. We weren't like fluffing it up with founding fathers rhetoric, which, I mean, that, we do things like that to appeal to certain audiences, but I realize that is so off-putting, the founding fathers.
Yeah. They're white supremacist psychopaths. Why are they appealing to anybody?
Yes, exactly. It's just I don't want to do the memes with the slave rapist on them. I just don't want to do that because it's not good for our cause. It's not like what we're trying to attract. I mean, that mentality is so gross. And that's one of my, reasons why I'm so anti-education, anti-public school specifically, because that the white supremacy or American exceptionalism and all those ideas get taught really early, and people just convince themselves of it. They may convince themselves of a less cruel version of it now, but that's still what the version of how the creation story of America really is. It's horrible. And I don't like to have to appeal to people by saying, let's go back to the time of the founding fathers. I don't think that's where we want to go. And it was not the most libertarian time. It was like only for a libertarian for a handful of people, I guess. And even that was not really conceptual yet. So no, I look for places so that we don't be as, like, the right-wing kookery that I want to keep deals more with things like free markets, mind your own business, people staying out of other people's affairs. It's kind of a little less, it's not so much the right-wing crankery. I don't understand the right-wing crankery of the people who, the current alt-right strain especially, that is obsessed with these different European migration patterns and cultures.
Right.
And just strange things that have nothing to do with, and
race science has come back, which, yeah. I mean, but there, see, I always say this, and this offends some people, but this is what the founding fathers were like. Read Thomas Jefferson. He was into all this pseudoscience nonsense too. This is what these people would look like Steve Saylor and Thomas Jefferson, Charles Murray. This is what these people are like. They're like these pseudoscientific dipshits. This is what it would be like if they were alive today. And keep in mind,
Yes, exactly. It's just, I look for places so that we don't be as, like, the right-wing kookery that I want to keep deals more with things like free markets, mind your own business, people staying out of other people's affairs. It's kind of a little less, it's not, what we're trying to attract. I mean, that mentality is so gross. And that's one of my, reasons why I'm so anti-education, anti-public school specifically, because that the white supremacy or American exceptionalism and all those ideas get taught really early, and people just convince themselves of it. They may convince themselves of a less cruel version of it now, but that's still what the
Okay, this is what it'd be like. So that, for me, I feel like, just as an outsider, to say, you're not going to out-kook the alt-right. Like, those people who you're appealing to with the founding fathers and the great white fathers of our past, Santa Claus remember Santa Claus people? That stuff, that isn't good. You're never going to alt-right the alt-right on that. You should probably drop that base principles. What do you think?
I have such a dim view of classical liberalism to begin with, and the Enlightenment, and that's come through like years of being in the libertarian movement has wrecked me for normal society. But I've only moved very slightly on the ideological spectrum, but I've moved from, I guess, super right libertarian to much more just plumb line anarchist, in that what the heck was the whole thing with the kookiness. Like, it's sad that you have to know who Steve Saylor is. And it's unfortunate that I have to defend people. Like, I don't defend this, but like, I have to explain that I run in the same circles as Charles Murray does. And I'm not proud with that, not happy with that. That's why I have a lot of neurotic tics, and I have that horrible Twitter account that I have. That's why I act out.
The periodically deleted Twitter account.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do have to delete tweets every single day, but it's just my neuroses stems from, like, recently there's a list of top 100 libertarians, and having to explain, yes, Charles Murray was on that list, and like, oh my God, of course he's a racist. And I get into arguments with economists who I know can think rationally, and I'm saying, no, he is a racist, but he's a great economist. Well, okay, yeah, there's lots of economists who aren't racist. Maybe we could promote those people. How about that?
Yeah, but he bewitched the liberals too. Let's keep it real.
Okay.
The Bell Curve got a great review, got incredible promotion from the New Republic, which is a magazine that's Air Force One, blah, 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 liberal magazine. Yes, they promoted that. They promoted welfare reform by putting a young black mother with a cigarette in her mouth on the cover. Ta-Nehisi Coates did an entire, breakdown of this over at The Atlantic about how the New Republic was pretty racist, and Marty Peretz was someone who had a great hatred, the publisher, who had a great hatred for blacks and Arabs. And so this is the racism is actually not, that's very establishment. I don't think it's not broken down by class. I think the upper class, the elite, are very racist. They just can't be openly racist against certain groups. They can openly hate the white working class for some reason, even though I think that's really contemptible. But they have to use all this sort of code language about, it's a genetic variance. Certain people developed in certain ways, and it really is that condescending. So Charles Murray, you could share him with the liberals and the mainstream, the most mainstream of mainstream, the New Republic, which gave him Andrew Sullivan when he was editor, gave him a glowing review. So he is mainstream racism.
Andrew Sullivan, and I remember that. I remember the New Republic in the 90s, and it was a neoconservative magazine, because that's what Martin Peretz was pushing, was the neoconservative agenda. It just was published under the liberal banner. But yes, Andrew Sullivan did push all that Charles Murray stuff onto everybody, and everyone was talking about IQs and the Bell Curve, which is a book this thick. And I remember reading and like already thinking this is going to be, it's just already just people's giant apologists for why our hierarchy, race hierarchy, and why white supremacy govern, why we have this whole structure is what it is. And so what if he says he's a social scientist, a damn good one? Well, that may be, but he's still a racist. And it's totally embarrassing. And I have to explain this stuff all the time, but it's a small price to pay to have a platform where I talk about why it's bad to kill children, or why it's bad to kill civilians, or why cops shouldn't be shooting black teenagers in the streets. If I've got to deal with Charles Murray, maybe Richard Spencer might be too much of a burden, but I could, whatever, I'll deal with that as it comes. But the issue of ending war, definitely imperialism, that's just a scourge. That this land stealing and destroying cultures and raping the environment. I shouldn't use the term rape. That's not the right word I was looking for, but ruining the environment. And the whole way it just reinforces all the terrible isms. But war is that great paradox. It's, on one hand, it reinforces homophobia and racism and all kinds of heterosexism and patriarchy. And on the other hand, it destroys traditional values and cultures. You can't have traditional family and have empire. Military service, that whole lifestyle is incompatible with the traditional family that conservatives claim they're about. And that always proves it to be a lie. The whole pro-life, whole pro-family stance is where it all comes apart, where they can't possibly believe their own foreign policy nonsense or rhetoric on that and be able to believe that and rationalize that all in their head at the same time.
Yeah, and it's an interesting mix, because it seems like, I agree that a lot of these are apologetics for the system as it is. It's saying that there's nothing wrong. This is just how it is. Which is, difficult enough in the domestic context. But then when you get into the foreign policy context, it gets even harder to sustain, which is America has to be running the world. America has to be in charge, because if not for America, everything would go to hell.
Or the other thing is, and if we didn't, then, someone else would, and it would be a much worse value system, if you will.
Right. It's either our value system or it's China's value system, rather than saying, well, actually, no, if you're just not dominating people, they'll more or less go along to get along, or they'll have their own issues, but we won't have to be dictating to them. So there is that sort of like, the hierarchy makes sense. Preserving the hierarchy is connected to imperialism, because if you believe it makes sense for this certain elite group to run the United States, why shouldn't they run the world?
Totally. Yeah, it totally makes sense. I don't, from that, and there's libertarians who even ultimately believe that. They just, try to soften the language they put that in, but people, and there's so much effort that goes into making the anti-war position sound irrational or un-American, and no one questions why there's so much effort that goes into it. But American nationalism is everyone's religion. Colin Kaepernick, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but with the football player, the people, he was making the very like a stand that anyone can, appreciate or respect, and people just went nuts. Like, they just went out of their damn minds over it, because people think the flag is sacred, America's sacred, and that America deserves to be spreading everywhere, and that it's just right to be everywhere. And normal people believe that. That's just the religious thing. It's like the whole hand over your heart and singing.
It's kind of weird to do that, to have that before a game, a sporting event. Like, you go around the world, it's kind of weird to have the national anthem played before you play a game. It's really, it's kind of weird to begin with, let alone I agree, the intensity, the hatred that directed at him for doing that.
And before, it was just what it's grown into, even at games where the national anthem was played, the most you had to do was stand up. There wasn't just all of these ceremonial things and ritual gestures that, must be followed.
You must place your hand over your heart. You must be solemn. You must cheer when it says home of the Brit. Like, it's like, what is this, church?
Yeah. It is like that. It is, like she said, it's true. It's a religion now.
It's a reason. It is a reason why. I don't know how controversial this is to your audience, but it is a reason why a lot of people in my community homeschool, because they don't want the message of nationalism or U.S. government entitlement to the world being taught, and it's really hard to escape that message. Even in really good private schools, depending on what kind of school you went to, that American nationalism is still what normal people believe, and that it's really hard to combat. And it's one of my cases, like in the world I live in, a lot of people don't go to school, or they go to free schools, or they were schooled at home. So there's not as much this reflexive nationalism that manifests itself in where, we're on Southwest and everybody says, yay, there's a troop on the plane. Kind of weird. Those weird things that we do all the time because they're true. I work out at 24-Hour Fitness, and there's always this thing, military, we take military hires, we give them priority, which I'm sure is great and all, but it's just whatever. It's that level of sacredness that never goes questioned. That's really creepy. And I don't understand, especially with Christian conservatives, I don't understand why they tolerate that much
deification of militarism.
Right. Where it should be kind of understood as blasphemy, but they seem to go along with it just fine. Just like the whole national anthem just seems like the whole process seems like it should be blasphemous in the first place, if I'm understanding certain aspects of Christianity correctly. But no, it's perfectly fine with most conservatives and people of faith. So I don't know. And maybe I'm misunderstanding a lot of things. I mean, obviously, I don't make good choices in life because I've been actively in the anti-war movement for many years, which is probably a mistake.
This interview is going great. I've made terrible life choices, including being a part of this movement.
It's like, it really is when you think about, like, I pretty much know, like, all the people who are really committed to the anti-war effort. Once you get past through all the people on Twitter, all the same libertarians from, like, maybe like the outer end of the right-wing spectrum, like someone like Tom Woods, all the way to, let's say, maybe Abby Martin, you got that kind of like full spectrum of normal people you heard of on Twitter. Like, there's about 200 people on Twitter. No, there's maybe like 500 people on Twitter who actually care about any of this. And then there's maybe, once you get to the peace churches and all the United for Peace and Justice people and the people who read Counterpunch and all the big Ron Paul fans, that's a pretty small percentage of the population. And I don't know. It's hard. There isn't enough Coke money in the world, Coke money, even if we got it, or Ron Paul support to get people to stop saying things on CNN like, oh, President Trump has become so presidential tonight because he sent off a bunch of missiles. That makes him presidential. That's the most presidential thing this person does, is try to randomly kill people. It's like, I can't fight that message. There isn't enough. Which is
the amount of it's pretty massive, right? I mean, Fareed Zakaria, Brian Williams practically creamed his pants watching those missiles go out. He's quoting Leonard Cohen and the beauty of our weapons. And I'm like, man, can you just go back to making up stories? Because this is terrifying. Yeah. This is actually scarier than the New Orleans thing or the I was on a helicopter. But it seems like there's periods of opening. So like after Iraq, there was an opening to really talk about how stupid this empire was for a minute. It wasn't long, and people flooded it in. And I got to say, there's a lot of people who are in the anti-war movement, at least on the left, who didn't miss the opportunity. What happened next is what's crazy, which is we got elected this seeming outsider, Mr. Barack Obama, who had been against the Iraq War, the peace candidate, who got into office, and the first thing he did was ensure that all the Bush war criminals would be fine. No prosecutions for torture, no prosecutions for illegal warfare. I mean, we basically, with Iraq, broke the Nuremberg laws, which one of the first ones is you can't wage aggressive war. I mean, we wrote those laws. You think we respect them a little bit. But so there was no punishment. There was no anything for the Bush people. They were essentially, indirectly pardoned. And so then he goes on his little militaristic trip. He does drone strikes. He does Libya, which turns into a total shit show, which Manchester bomber had some experiences in before he came home to the UK. They had these disasters, and he had Syria, which has been a complete nightmare, which we instigated, by the way, for people who don't know.
He beefed up the special forces, too.
Beefed up special forces. AfricaCom, we were in over,
took it all
50 countries. The JSOC has been put on steroids. We've got kill lists. He assassinated an American citizen without a trial, Anwar al-Awlaki. And then so that's not working either. So then you got a guy who runs saying this whole thing is stupid. So it seems like it's not like we're not being effective. And then he gets in and does this and doubles down on the stupidity. Huge. Bigly, he doubles down. So it seems like we're actually kind of winning the argument with the public, is kind of my view.
Well,
like Barack Obama was a repeat.
Look at 2013, you had some like 90-some% of the population saying, hell no, do not
do Syria, right?
Bomb Assad. Do not do that regime change. We know this is going to turn into another broader war, quagmire. I mean,
right.
We had, what's the congressman from North Carolina Walter Jones. Walter Jones said he had active military calling him anonymously, something that had never happened to him in his entire congressional career. And the whole damn country just said no. So as frustrating
so it's not like we're being
to be an
effective
anti-war person, and you feel like you're alone because, you're the only one spending the time to write about this stuff and all that, as clearly we're not alone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. To Angela's point, like, the anti-war movement, both the left and the right of it, have successfully win the argument each time. Like, people go, yeah, we don't want more war. Okay, we'll elect Barack Obama. It just seems like it doesn't matter. So I wouldn't be so disheartened by the public. I think the public buys it. What do you think, Angela?
Maybe I'm very, very cynical about electoral methods to change anything, changing structures. So I question that, the particular votes we may try to be extracting more meaning than's there. I mean, part of the state religion is, you must go vote and exercise that vote, and people have died and fought for the right to vote, and voting has been denied different dispossessed groups. But I just don't think you can't undermine the structure. It's going to get bigger no matter who got in there. I mean, Ron Paul was never going to get in there, and there was never going to be a chance Rand Paul was ever going to be president, even if I thought he was going to be a good one, which, as we can see, he's another libertarian male train wreck. But sorry, that was really wrong. That just is years of cynicism and growing up in the libertarian movement. But anyone they put in there. I mean, obviously we knew with Hillary Clinton. I mean, she was part of that apparatus. She was just going to make it bigger, and there's no reason Donald Trump would do anything differently if you look at just the patterns of what presidents do and what it means to be the president and all the bodies someone, at least not literally as figuratively, has to step over to be in charge of the empire.
Empire maintenance.
Well, no, but I agree with what you're saying. I think we're actually in agreement, which is people got up, they voted, they voiced their opinion to pollsters and everyone else, and they didn't get what they asked for. So, and what you seem to be saying is that, well, it looks like it's not effective. I mean, we're being effective, and I think on some level, convincing people it's wrong. But I also agree with you that it doesn't seem to matter because a candidate will just show up, say some bullshit about how they get it. We get it. Iraq. Nope. Whoops. We're not going to do that again. Oh, Libya. Yeah, we'll do that. So it seems like the public debate, what they've decided to do instead of, they don't defend it. That's the thing about this empire is unlike other empires, nobody claims it. They never admit it's an empire. They never claim it. So what happens is when politicians, particularly for major parties, get up there, is they yes you to death. Of course, no, we need to have a reasonable foreign policy, a common sense. Hillary Clinton, to some degree, I'll give her this. She actually didn't hide her militarism. She openly said, I'm going into Syria. I'm going to establish a no-fly zone. I'm going to bomb the Russians and, whatever happens next, baby. And so I'll give her that. She was kind of openly militaristic in a very irresponsible way, but at least open. So I agree with you. I think the voting structures, it can't come from this because politicians just yes you to death. And then they get there and they talk to the arms manufacturers. They talk to the deep state. They talk to all these people who have an interest in maintaining the empire or getting a $300 billion arms deal from these, Saudi terror sponsors. And it's like, who cares what the little people think? So I don't know. I agree with you on that. Like it is ineffective.
Yeah. I mean, I can't vote out the deep state and, loading all my, all the Ron Paul youth now into a van isn't going to, undermine 17 intelligence agencies. But we're with you on all of that, getting rid of the deep state. There's very few libertarians and the ones, I'm sure, I know there's some of my people that whose behavior is constantly embarrassing that I'm constantly apologizing for, but the deep state is not a libertarian position and it's not an anti-war position. And there are people who seem to be very confused about that because their obsession with Trump as a person so much blinded them to this horrible apparatus which spies on everyone and is responsible for killing people. So no, we're with the left on that. That's a solid thing that we can all work together on, like getting rid of the deep state.
I really do think the labels are breaking down, and even the big labels, the left-right label. Like I personally don't feel like I belong to either of those. I don't think there's any label that really describes me either anymore. So, and I think there are a lot of people like me. So you just take the independent label, right? And you can say what your history was. That tells you a little bit more about yourself. But I think the labels are really, really failing right now.
Doesn't it seem it's purposeful, though? I mean, I kind of see what you're saying. And I definitely agree that, there's a lot of commonality between the libertarians. That's why I'm glad we did this show and talked about some of the differences, but also talked about some of the similarities that make sense. But it's, liberal used to mean everyone on the left. And now because we had this really brutal primary that's still going on Twitter, by the way. For those who don't know, on Twitter, 2016 never ended. Every day I tweet that Hollywood sign Bernie would have won at somebody. So so every day, or that, photoshopped Hillary Clinton, Bernie would have won, CNN breaking news. I do that every day, and people tell me, he's an old bastard who couldn't beat her in the primary. So what am I even talking about? So while the 2016 Democratic primary still goes on Twitter, it did clarify some of the differences within the party itself. Because Democrats, let's be clear here, we're talking a lot about right-wing imperialism. Bob Kagan, the neocon godfather, and a friend of ours, Robbie Martin, did an entire trilogy on something called A Very Heavy Agenda, his whole family, to a level that was somewhat creepy, to be honest. But I love it. That was great. Bob Kagan now has stopped calling himself a neoconservative. He now says he's a liberal interventionist. That's his new term. Oh. And guess what? He was put in charge of a major position at a liberal think tank, the Brookings Institution. So remember, are these imperialist liberals who, all you need to do is you don't even have to show anything. You just have to say, as the bomb whistles by, humanitarian cause. Boom! You don't have to actually prove it or anything. You just have to say it, So it's not just a right-wing pathology. People on the left and liberals have this issue with the empire. They are liberal imperialists. Bill Clinton was a liberal imperialist. Missile cruise liberals, right? Cruise missile liberalism. They might not want to commit. They might not want to go big and really blow things up. I think Obama's foreign policy, his advisor called it, don't do stupid shit. Although then he did Libya, which I think definitely qualifies as stupid shit.
That was everybody else's.
Yeah, that's epic stupid shit. But so liberal, it's not just a right-wing problem. This is a problem in our house too, which is liberals who enjoy warfare. They get motivated by it. They just need to have it sold to them differently. They can't sell it under chest-beating nationalism or look how big my dick is type Republican talking points. They need a kind of, and so easily manipulated, they need the Syria boy, right? The CNN cries over. They need some kind of humanitarian aspect to unleash holy hell on a group of people. So it's not just a problem on your
do something.
Do something. We have to do something. So it's not just on your side of the street, Angela. It's absolutely on our side of the street. We have a lot of imperialists over here.
And I'm so sorry about that. Robbie Martin's Twitter feed's heroic, and the Kagans are a creepy family, and they deserve creepy attention. And it's and this is where I've got to give a lot of credit to my colleague Justin Raimondo, who's very good at pointing out where there's a really flexible nature inside the horribleness of neoconservatism, where it can kind of easily just put itself over liberalism. To me, neoconservative, and I grew up reading commentary and National Review and the New Republic, and neoconservatism just is a form of white nationalism that's just kind of a particular type of white nationalism that's more targeted, but it is, I mean, that is what it is. I mean, what the hell? I mean, America's going to rule the world, America exceptionalism, America police state. I mean, America policing the world. I mean, that is what that message is. I don't know how to separate those two very clearly. So the liberal, I guess this is maybe the biggest change, even though I'm still like an Ayn Rand loving kook, is that I just think liberals are conservative reactionaries too.
Oh, totally. They just have imbibed part of the left. Like, so the left waged this thing called the civil rights movement, which began, it's been a long time in this country. There was progressive movements after the Civil War, but then they all got killed. So, but eventually they made some progress in pushing for civil rights. And now it's no longer acceptable for the liberal elite, who have always been the elite, by the way. They've always been a white supremacist liberal elite. New York's been calling the shots for a while, since the mid 19th century. They now know they can't be openly. See, Charles Murray was a kind of workaround. It was kind of like, okay, we can't say, we're racist anymore. We have to sort of say, well, science said it. Science. Science is important. We didn't say you're inferior beings. We just science. It's just chemicals. What do you want? So they can't get away with that. So their vision is kind of a sort of white supremacy, but with a kind of window dressing and some tokenism and Like Barack Obama is their perfect, like, oh, here's a man who overcame things and he joined the meritocratic elite. Like, all he needed to hear was he went to Harvard. Oh, he went to Harvard. Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, let him in. Let him in the country club. Cool. Okay, he went to Harvard. And that's like the new vision of liberal imperialism. It's not as retrograde as it was before, but it's in no way egalitarian. They're not egalitarian at all. They want hierarchy. In fact, in their view, they've built the best hierarchy of all, which is a, quote, meritocracy. You don't get to rule unless you're one of the good people and you excel and you have a high IQ. So it's a hierarchical domination system. And liberals, the mainstream establishment liberals, are absolutely its chief defenders and proselytizers. They don't have doubts about an unequal society. They want an unequal society. Does that make sense?
Well, their model relies on it.
Right. It's a feature, not a bug.
This empire operates with, the top X% elite that sells out the rest of the population, make sure that all the resources from that country are available to the empire and all that. I mean, you say that neoconservatives are supremacists, but I mean, neoliberals are, I think, also supremacists. And the thing that I don't know why it took me so long to see this. And actually, I don't know even if I'm right, because I don't see a lot of other people saying it, but I mean, I think there's a real whiff of fascism in both the neoliberal and neoconservative elite. And it's interesting how, let's say, zealous they were to label other people as fascists, because I thought it was a soft of fascism with a veneer sort of kind of thing. But I'm unsure because I don't think that many people see it that way.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, the whole Samantha Power, all that soft power and all the things that came with responsibility to protect, and now I guess liberal interventionism is recognized as its own category now. It's impossible to separate those, but we lose. It just is, even though we'll lose, like, let's say the bottom, like a small percentage of the libertarian movement at the bottom, let's say they'll get shaved off by the alt-right, kind of near our more elites and more moderate, better heeled libertarians, they get shaved off by neoliberalism. So it's a right-wing grab from both ends. And and it's because specifically that my focus is on ending empire. I just spend a lot of time trying to keep the environment not safe. I mean, just trying to stay principled to our actual beliefs and not let this kind of creepiness come in, because of the alt-right wanting to bring in things like borders, or I guess in the Richard Spencer world, you're actively active cleansing. You're killing off whatever racial group he claims to be representing. And then with neoliberalism, it's just spreading whatever white upper middle class culture is, corporate culture is everywhere. That's all neoliberalism ultimately is. It's not like it's diversity or anything. It's whatever white liberals think is what normal is, and that's just what's going to be the culture, the common culture of the world. And I don't know if that's necessarily desirable. And I think you should ask the people involved before we start doing things. And certainly we should ask the people involved before we start bombing on their behalf. And ask the actual people, not just the people that we give foreign aid money to when we bribe and all that nonsense.
The exiles, we use the exiles as, representatives of entire populations.
Yeah, Shalaby. Remember Shalaby, Ahmed right. Shalaby? I forgot about that guy. I think he's dead, I hope.
And so with the Syria war too, there's
always some fringe exiles who haven't lived in the country for 20 years but claim they have popular support. Was it Hamid Karzai, right, of Afghanistan, UNICAL? He hasn't lived there for a long time. We just basically installed him as a sort of puppet government. But
it happens all the time. Yeah.
But Angela, to your point, the least constituency you'll find in the imperial system that we are as American citizens is there's no constituency for the foreign. I mean, they don't have a voice. They don't vote. They don't live here. So when they get killed, so for example, libertarianism has a lot of appeal to, the Wall Street Journal crowd because they hate regulation. So there's a constituency there. They might not get shaved off. But when you say, isn't it wrong to kill these people overseas? Well, those people are overseas, so they're not even part of the community. This is, I think, a real difficulty for the left, too, which is we try to do, and then some people do, I think, kind of I don't want to say, human tragedy porn, but they kind of like, oh, look at how terrible this is. And look what we're doing. For example, Yemen, which is suffering a famine right now that we are absolutely part of. We're giving the Saudis weapons. We're actually doing in-flight refueling. We're doing it. But then you say to people, well, look what we're doing in Yemen. And it's like, yeah, but who's the constituency for that in the United States political system? So for me, I think you have the toughest job in show business here, because you're trying to advocate for people who aren't even, let alone, forget on the lower end of our power system. They're not even in the system, right?
They're not in the system. And it's like the average North American doesn't quite see other people in other countries as human. I mean, even I know how my racism is, even it's hard for me to see even Putin or the family that's run Korea, or the late Hugo Chavez in my brain, or Fidel Castro, who may or may not still be alive because he's probably transhumanist of some kind out there in the space. But it's just in my racist brain, I see them as cartoon characters in a way I don't quite see the president, the U.S. president, as a cartoon. Though now I've gotten to that point. So it's just so I know I'm going to guess that the average American just has a hard time really conceiving people in other countries, especially as you move further and further away from Northern and Western Europe, conceiving them as individual people with personalities and individual will and volition. They just sort of become an abstract, and especially since most North Americans don't really care about geography very much. Or
understand it.
Yeah.
Cartoon. Trump is Dennis the Menace haircut. That's cartoonish. But generally speaking, you're basically running an abstraction. You're like, isn't it wrong to kill people in a very abstract way that is in no way visceral? Unlike, for example, isn't it wrong for the president to do this to Social Security? Social Security, my grandmother gets that. So I agree with that. It's cartoonish. It's just abstract. And so the human cost, there's no visceral connection. You have to play to sort of movies that are already in people's heads, like starving kids in Africa. You have to kind of play into it, which in and of itself is kind of part of the system, right? The sort of, well, be compassionate, give a penny. Okay, you've done it. You gave a penny. You did it. You're a good person now. Go away. So you have to kind of play with it, and then you're playing a manipulation game. And Madison Avenue and the PR companies that run the PR companies, the defense companies hire, and the politicians and the media, the mainstream media, are much better at the manipulation game than you can ever be. So you have to kind of do the truth, but the truth just doesn't seem to be always that compelling because it's so abstract. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I try. It's making those abstracts concrete. That's the whole essence of the job, because no one. I can try, but it's just. There's so many good writers on the Pentagon, and there's so much good stuff written on how corrupt the Pentagon is and how badly that all needs to be audited, but that just isn't winning hearts and minds out there. I'm not winning. If I thought I could win the economic arguments, I'd just be on the street corner screaming about the Federal Reserve all day, but that has not been effective. It doesn't work. I've tried different things.
Fractional reserve banking isn't lighting them on fire, huh?
It's not sexy. People aren't going to get out of their cars. They're not going to honk about it. And the guys who do honk about that or get people, I just generally have to end up with the stalkers, or they become people that I have to explain. Yes, I know Code Pink people. Yes, they're on the left. Yes, I get that. Thank you for explaining to me. I've never heard that before. Thank you, new libertarian. Thank you for explaining to me that Code Pink people are on the left. It was all right. Every day is just it's I have to explain things, just explaining with the smartest people in the movement. There's a difference between liberal and left, and depending on what audience they're speaking to, because libertarians are great at saying, well, where's the left, the anti-war left? I said, the anti-war left has always been here. You're talking about liberals, and that's the huge chunk of people that went missing. They're called liberals. And there's
the party flips, liberals go away. When it's a Republican in the White House, liberals, Democrats are anti-war. When it's a Democrat in the White House, they have nothing to say at all, and he's just doing what he has to do. He had to, Bill Clinton had to bomb that medicine facility in the Sudan. The Republicans wouldn't stop talking about blowjobs. What else are you going to do? They flip. They're gone. The minute a D, and it could be any Democrat, is in there, It's over. Trust me. It's kind of like, hello? Is anybody else at this rally? Hello? Where'd everybody go? Oh, a Democrat became president. Oh, it's over. See you in 48 years. We'll see you again. So
I'm still waiting for them to come back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's why I hate Russiagate, because it's distracting them from coming back to the real issues. That's why I hate it so much. And this is now the liberals. If this is, I don't know, is this progress or liberals are now InfoWars? The liberals have become InfoWars with Russia.
They've swallowed the whole thing, and they have their own conspiracy theorists now, and people are making money on that nonsense. And normal people will talk to me about Russiagate. Aren't you worried about the Russians? I haven't been worried about the Russians since I was a little kid.
Hey, you might, when you get back to reading today's news, it looks like they also now have a female whistleblower hero too. So,
God, her name is Reality Winner, and I'm not mispronouncing.
Right. She has 3 names actually.
Like Lee Harvey Oswald.
Leia, like Princess. Well, not the same spelling, but just occurs to me it's Leia, like Princess Leia Winner.
Okay.
And she's going to be the whistleblower hero who's going to prove that Russiagate is true, and she's also going to rescue the Democrats from those awful, inconvenient facts about how hundreds of thousands of people were removed from voter rolls, and
it's got
knows
everything.
how that happened, but it looks like the Russians did it.
Oh, the Russians did it.
Somehow I don't know, they happen to be a lot of Bernie voters too, but
the Russians invented racism in America, too. Did you know that? There wasn't racism before Putin. Putin went back in time and created the transatlantic slave trade and wrote the Constitution. They wanted to be equality, but Putin said, no, you have to put in slavery. So, Russia is responsible for all our historic crimes. It's, when you get car sick, that's Putin.
Undermining all our institutions.
Undermining all our institutions. He's why we have an unequal society. He invented Wall Street. It's just, this is this conspiracy to end all conspiracies. I don't know what to tell you there. So that's what I mean. I can't, I guess we kept it 2 hours. Okay. So I guess we should close by saying where the left has a lot of problems too. We appreciate coming together with libertarians. I think coalitions and looking past our petty differences to unite around hating other people's petty differences. No, looking past our petty differences and uniting on these issues makes sense to me. So, Angela, do you want to tell people where they can find your work and what's coming up next for you?
Antiwar.com. What's coming up next for me? I hope not being taken away in the next Red Scare. That's what my basic hopes are. That's just all. I just want survival at this point. My ambitions are no longer as grand. Like 10 years ago when I thought we're not going to need antiwar.com. War will be over by then. The empire will be over. Obama.
Well, good luck, comrade. No svidanya. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh my God.
We'll do this again someday.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
See ya. And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Angela Keaton, Executive Director of Antiwar.com. Follow her on Twitter at Antiwar2. If you'd like to support the show for as little as $5 a month, please visit us at patreon.com/aroundtheempire. Questions, comments, want to yell at me? Dan at shatterproof.com. See you next time.
Take care.